Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. We're back again, and we're doing our pandemic projects. And as a custom of recent, I'd like to thank everybody who's involved in actively keeping us safe during the pandemic. That includes our emergency workers, our first-line responders, and our frontline personnel, regardless of whether you're in medical or in any kind of support function. Thank you for everything it is that you're doing to help keep us safe and keep us out of harm's way. Really do appreciate your efforts. Today I got a treat. I have a Daiwa 2500 punch, and what I think is interesting about this one is that it carries the inscription that a lot of the trade reels that Daiwa manufactured has. It says, engineered and developed by Daiwa Corporation, California, USA. If you find, I think Ocean Star was one, King Neptune was another. There's several brands out there. Sears has a couple of reels out there as well that carry that. So those are Daiwa reels, but under a trade name. In this case, this is actually a Daiwa reel. It's the Daiwa 2500 punch. Reads as high-speed ball bearing, and I can't wait to get started on this one. I found this one at a local flea market. It's been in my to-do pile for some time now, and just finally had a moment here to take it apart and make this a pandemic project. So I'm going to start by removing the exterior pieces, one of which is the handle. Normally you can remove a handle by turning it counterclockwise. If you find that there's any resistance at all, well, in this case, just turn around. You'll see that this is a through handle held in place by a screw, and that screw needs to be removed and the handle needs to be pulled out as opposed to unscrewing that. So check. And that goes for whether that screw is visible like it is here, or if it's hiding behind a plastic cap. I just did a reel, the Garcia 3800, and it had a little plastic cap, usually associated with a screw type of a handle. And sure enough, if you remove the cap, you found a screw under there. So be careful with that. Be careful with the reel in general. It's an old reel and you won't find the parts for it. Okay, I'm going to take the side plate screws out. This has got what I call a half side plate. The side plate does not tuck under the rotor, so you can access the gearing without taking the rotor off. We'll take the rotor off because that's where the bearing is, but you can progress this by taking off the side plate screws. When I do that, I like to place them on my table, and I do that because there's a lot of times where these side plate screws have a different length or a different thread, and you want to notice that if that's the case. Alright, the three of these are the same, so we're going to just move those off to the side. Right now I have the anti-reverse engaged. I always like to take the anti-reverse and move it to the off position, so that if I do pull a main gear out or something, I don't spring the anti-reverse. And now I can pull that side plate off. And what we have basically is a dry reel. Okay, there's a little shield washer that's on this arm. You want to note that. If you don't have a schematic for this reel, what I like to do is to take pictures along the way. I'm taking those pictures right now with the video camera, but you can take it with a cell phone camera, you can take it with a standard digital camera, or anything that will give you a place and time so that you can go back and check orientation. For example, with this swing arm, we'll take that off right now just to show you. It's held in place by a pin. And it's very easy to reinstall that swing arm backwards. So take a picture, know that it's coming down like the letter, rather than the number 9, coming down like the letter G it would be. Oddball, but regardless, let's clean the old grease off of that while I have that off. And then you'll notice a couple of things. I have a protective glove on my hand to keep the greases off. And I also use a parts tray, in this case the bottom of a milk jug, to store those parts so that when I go to reinstall, I know where they are. With that arm out now and that pin pulled, you can remove the shaft and the spool in a single motion. this has got a lot going on, right? It's got the circle here, which is driven the cross line arm, which is moving the spool up and down. It's got the tooth ratchet here, which is receiving the back of this, which is your anti-reverse. And it's got the main gear on the back, which is driving this whole thing. Dried grease on both. So let's go ahead and get that old grease off. It's been a long time since this reel has been serviced based on the look of the grease. And I use a series of paper towels, cotton swabs, and if I need to, a penetrating oil to act as a degreaser. In this case, this is cleaning up pretty nicely, but I'll show you that penetrating oil. Just kind of give it a quick squirt there. And let it sit a moment or two. That's really if it's stubborn and gummed up. In this case, the grease just chose to settle into one spot. And you can also use a little screwdriver or something, get into nooks and crannies of the outside here, because the grease is dirty, and dirt is an enemy of fishing reels. It's going to either bog down the performance, or it's going to act like an emery cloth or a piece of sandpaper and kind of grind away at the metal parts if you got something like sand in there or dried salt or whatever. Okay, so this is cleaned, and you want to make sure as you're doing this, check the teeth. Make sure that all those teeth are nice and rigid, that they're not rounded over. Check it from the front, and also check it from the side, because you may see a valley in there, which means that the gear is warped and will not perform optimally. All right, we're going to take the piece off of here while we're at it. Just a little bit of grease that's accumulated around the position where that pinion gear and shaft is going to go through. And then we'll come up top and we'll remove that pinion gear. And this is my which socket is it game that I play. There we go. Actually, not bad. It only took 2 tries. And I keep sockets on my desk just to make sure that it works and that I have easy access to it. We'll try for the first. I tried the traditional reverse thread and it actually started tightening it. So I tried. Okay, before we go up top, there's one more piece. That's the little carrier that we have for the crosswind block. That's where that point is going to sit. That goes in our tray. Just clean out that little piece that's left over there. There's a little bit of grease underneath. A little bit in that channel there. And then we can go up top and remove the rotor. So grab the rotor. I use a socket. I set it for a traditional unwind, break that nut, and then we can just remove the nut in a traditional counterclockwise direction. It has a little hold fast here, or a keyway. We should be able to just pull that up. All those parts can go in my tray. And then I have 3 screws holding on the pinion gear and the bearing. So I'm going to just remove these. And these I'm going to lay on my table because we're just going to take this out. We're going to examine the parts. We're going to re-lube and we're going to reinstall. So these do not need to get put in the tray for any period of time unless you were going to take a break or something, and you don't want to leave anything laying around. Keep them all in one place for safekeeping. Alright, this is the third. That collar came out and the whole piece should come off of that. That's a real small bearing. Test it, make sure that it's working properly. It is. Slide it off, and then we can clean up that pinion gear. Wipe the excess greases off as much as you can, and then generally a little wire brush or a toothbrush or a bristle brush or whatever can take care of what you weren't able to wipe off. When it's nice and clean, you can wipe both sides of that bearing, put oil on it, reinstall the bearing onto the shaft. Make sure that you get a very liberal dose of grease onto the pinion gear, since that hasn't seen grease in quite some time. And then we can go ahead and reinstall this back in, making sure that the case itself is clear and clean, which it is. We'll go ahead and reinstall. We're going in. Okay, we reinstall simply by pressing down on the bearing. Then we can reinstall our collar. We have the 3 Phillips head screws, which I left right on the deck. And generally I like to get them in, but I don't like to tighten them down until all 3 are in, just because if there's any play in that side, one may wind up not being aligned properly. So just get all 3 started and then you can tighten them down. So Daiwa made a lot of trade reels at the time, but it also marketed under its own name, Daiwa. I think since then I don't believe that they are making trade reels any longer. I think they're simply working with the Daiwa brand for the ones that they make. Okay, that's down. You can notice we still have play in this pinion gears. That's going to be held on by the rotor, so hold your hand or finger up as you go to reinstall your rotor. Now this rotor you just need to inspect to make sure it's clean. There's nothing going on here. There is no trip lever. This has got what I call a bang bail. I'm not quite sure what the industry calls it. I call it a bang bail. If I was to fish this reel, I would never trip this lever by banging it against the side. You'll see that little plastic cap. That's what it's intended to do. I would simply flip it manually, but there are folks that will bang it around. And it's not just this reel that's on the older Penn spin fishers. It's on a lot of different reels at the time. It was an acceptable way to do it. And there is a spring there that assists on the trip back, but for the most part I just don't like banging things. It's like the Ocean City 112, 113. That trip lever on that conventional reel was designed to be knocked with the handle. Well, I always put it back manually. Okay, tighten that down. Give it a spin, make sure it spins easily. Boy, it sure does, right? While we're at it, we can oil the critical points on the bail. That's a static line roller. It doesn't have a bearing in it, but get some oil on that. Some oil onto the seams where the bail is. You do not need to remove the bail unless there's a problem. In this case, we have a functional spring doing fine. You don't even need to oil this. It's a dead end. If you want to, it's a friction point. You can put a little bit of oil on that. So let's rebuild the reel then. We're going to start by taking the main gear, and we're going to put the grease onto its key points. Get it on the shaft. Get it into the teeth of the main gear. Make sure that you put a liberal dose in there because this hasn't seen it. It's a case bushing over there, so just make sure you get it onto the shaft there. This is our pin. You're going to notice that the shaft has the hole right on the bottom. At this point, I think I'll probably take this off because we're going to work on the spool anyway. So we'll take the adjuster knob off, push the shaft through. I'm going to clean that shaft. Now if you notice that was sticky at all, go ahead and use steel wool or scrubby or something to polish it, but this one's held up nicely. You'll see that the hole is all the way in the bottom, so this is going to ride like this, and that pin from the crosswind arm is going to come in and lock in on that. So that's how this is going to set up. What we'll do here is we're going to put the crosswind gear in and put a little bit of grease on that. Don't put a lot on because it's only going to scrape off. That hole in the pinion gear here is very close tolerances. And we can seat this into the shaft. Remember, it looked like the letter G instead of the number 9. You can put some grease onto the back of this as well, where it's going to contact the main gear. You can also slide it over here and bring that down and line that up with the hole in the axle shaft. And we have our pin that goes in. And you need to work that so that you can get that through the hole. And we just had that little stud which is going to ride in this groove in the case here. That should be the only thing that's exposed on the bottom of that right now. You can get that little bit of that dirt out of there. You can put a little bit of grease in there. You don't want to clog too much. It'll just accumulate and dry eventually and stop the function there. All right, and then as I mentioned, we had that one piece that kind of came out with the case that maybe you didn't see when you took it off, but there's a shim washer that goes on the top of the gear and holds that crosswind gear flush to the reel. Simply then reverse the case. Put that back to this position now. And that's just a tight fit at the moment. There we go. Don't push anything, don't pressure anything. If it's not fitting properly, take your time, take it off, take a look. There's a reason sometimes why things don't fit smoothly. Maybe something's hanging out, and if you force it, chances are you're going to break it. So just be patient and double check your work if you think that something's not going properly. And then I hand tighten down. In this case there's only 3, doesn't matter what pattern you put them in. Just make sure that they're all equally torqued and tight. And then just go back and check to make sure that you have them tightened, as there may be some additional play in it. We have the anti-reverse, you can hear it clicking. We have it off when... Okay, let's put the handle back in then. Square handle. Nut and little washer on the back side of this. And we'll turn our attention to the spool. Then I'll just clean that up a little bit. So the spool has a drag set up top. It's held in place by a 5-pointed spring. Hold your finger on that spring because it can shoot, and use a pick or a small screwdriver to pull that spring out. This is the spring. This doesn't have a lot of max drag, we can tell because of the size of the washers here. And interestingly enough, we got a so we have a solid solid bottom to the stack. It's full of grease. So let's make sure that gets cleaned. Get all of that out of there. We have 2 fabric washers. The traditional setup. So this is the cup that goes in underneath. So the cup sits down first. Fabric washer. We can put some grease on these washers. I'm just checking on this. We can put some grease on there. So I'm going to use a drag grease called Cal's Universal Drag Grease for this. So the first one is a bell washer, and then we have this bottom cap washer here which goes in, or flat washer. Next one up is that fabric washer. Put that grease on and now it's sticking to me. We put the eared washer in. That's the one with the 2 points. They go in a slot. We do the same thing here. We'll get some grease on that. I use my glove to wipe that around. So again, I can keep the kind of the greases off my hand, but I can use it as a tool as well. Then our top one goes on. Then that little pointed spring goes on. There's a groove in here. Make sure you seat that spring inside the groove. And just check to make sure it's in a groove all around. It is. Let's go ahead and reinstall that then. You can, while you have it off, it's usually a little bit easier to clean it this way. Nice molded spool with the Daiwa and raised letters on it. There's a little bit of dirt underneath here. Let's get that out too. So it's been a while since this reel's gone fishing, that's for sure. I'm not quite sure when. I do know that it's been a while. We can tell that from the greases that we took off. There you go. Just want to work it so that all of those washers align on that shaft. Use your drag button to tighten it down. There's no markings on this, but I believe this reel was made in Korea. There we go, we're locked down. So then I like to move it back. This reel is called a skirted spool reel, in that the spool goes over the rotor cup instead of inside the rotor cup like some traditional designed reels. And that's so that when you're reeling your line and it's wet, the water will fall off rather than fall into the body of the reel. All right, let's give that a ride. That's a nice free riding reel at the moment. So here's the bang feature. If you set your bail, it's going to come over here and it's going to whack. You can see how the arm is going to hit this plastic. And with enough whack, it's going to flip it. So the idea is to kind of trip, hit and trip. Hit and trip. Well, I don't like that. So this one enables you to cast and then manually flip the bail back as if it was hitting this little piece over here. And that's my recommendation. If you have a reel like this, whether it's the spin fisher, the older spin fishers, or any of the others, use it as a manual bail. This whack feature, you can use it, but I don't recommend doing that. I don't like to have anything bang on reels. So that's personal preference. Well, this is a really smooth operating reel, as you can tell. It's ready to go fishing again, and that's kind of why I do it. So give those reels a second chance. So I hope you've appreciated that. If you did and like it, please indicate that on the screen. If you have a question about this reel or any reel in particular, leave it in the comment section. I do try to reply to all. And finally, if you like this and want to see more, please subscribe. That way you don't miss any of the episodes that I've been doing, and I've been posting quite frequently lately. And then if you have a reel that needs service or repair and you don't want to do it yourself, well, I do that by mail, and you can contact me through the information on my business card. Please use the email. It is the best way for me to respond, and I will get back to you with that service information. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.